Hello and welcome to another video in the How to Make a Chrome Extension video tutorial series. In this video, we're going to talk about how to create notifications and how to run an API job continuously in the background every minute. Let's get started. The first thing we want to do is look at the format of the API call that we're going to run in the background and what that endpoint is going to look like. I have the endpoint already written up here and I'm going to paste this in the description below. The information that we're really curious about is this locations slash some number of digits. This does not have to be only 4 digits. It can be any random number of digits. And then we see a slots with a question mark and a query param of start timestamp and end timestamp. You'll see the timestamp that I've written here of February 11th, 23 and March 22nd of 23. Specifying the start timestamp will show us all of the slots that are close to that timestamp. In our case, we see that the first appointment that shows up is February 11th at 15:30, which is 3:30 p.m. And this continues all the way down to 3:21, which is the last appointment before we hit 3:22 at the start of the day. Scrolling back to the top, you'll see that it begins with an array. So you'll have a list of many objects. Each object contains all of these values in here. And the values that we're really concerned about is active and timestamp. Active because this tells us how many appointments are available. Total tells us how many appointments there are, but active tells us how many of those are available to be booked. Timestamp tells us when this appointment will be available to be booked. In our case, we said 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon on February 11th of 2023. To verify what we're seeing, let's go to the Global Entry Appointment Scheduler website to see what the first available appointment is on the website. I'm here on the TTP Global Entry website and I'll post this link in the description below. I'm going to hit Tucson, which is the location that we're looking at, 9240. We'll see that the first available appointment is February 22nd of 2023. Let's choose this location. If you hit the day February 22nd, you'll see that there's a time slot available at 7 p.m. Let's hop back over to the API call and find this specific appointment to see what that data format looks like. Back in the API call window, I'm going to hit Command F or Control F if you're on PC, and I'm going to search for active with more than 0. For us, that would be one open location. And the first one that we find is indeed 2023, February 22nd at 1900 hours, which is 7 p.m., which is exactly what we saw as the appointment available on the Global Entry website. So what we need to do is whenever we make our API calls in the background, we need to verify that all of the slots returned have some kind of element within them. And we want to filter only the elements that have an active field with a value greater than 0. There could be more than one active appointment. You could have 3. In our case, there's a total of 2. So you could have 2 appointments that are available. But we just want to find the one appointment that's available that the user can immediately book. Back in our code base, let's make a new API call. Create a new file and call it fetch open slots.js. This is the API call that is going to make a request to the government website to get a list of appointments. And when we get that list of appointments, we're going to filter to find one that's open for the user at the earliest date that matches their criteria. I'm going to write a comment at the top to let me know what this is doing. Then going to write export const fetch open slots. We will use a fat arrow function with result as a parameter. In here, I'm going to make a comment and paste the endpoint URL that we were just visiting. And we're going to analyze this together. So as I said earlier, what we're really interested in is this location ID here, the start timestamp, and the end timestamp. We already have this information from what the user inputs in the Chrome extension window. In our Chrome extension window, if you hit right-click, inspect on the location ID, you'll notice that every single value has its own corresponding value with a data-tz in here. And this is important for whenever we create our notification and we want to show what time zone that the date and time is being displayed in. So we have the location ID here as the value of the option. We'll also get the start and end date from whatever input the user has selected for the start date and the end date. Those 3 pieces of data will be passed in as part of the result object here at the top. Let's use the same destructuring method that we used for the on message listener, where we get a data object and we pull out certain fields within that data object. We're going to do the same thing here. Let's write const destructured of location ID, start date, and end date, and set that to result. Now we need to create this endpoint with the dynamic values that are passed in as part of the result object. So for the location ID variable, we need to put that in here, and we need to put the start date here and the end date here. Now our inputs are really only returning the date itself. It doesn't give us a timestamp. So we're going to fill in the timestamp ourselves manually, hard-coded as part of this endpoint. But if you wanted to give the user more flexibility in choosing the time, you could add add an additional input within the Chrome extension window that lets them select the time that they would like to start searching for. We're going to create this dynamic URL by using something called string interpolation or a string literal. And we can do that in JavaScript by writing the variable that we want, in this case, appointment URL. Then we can write backtick, an opening one and a closing one. Copy this endpoint here, and let's paste this within the backticks. Select the 4 digits here, backspace, and then write $, open and closed brackets. And within here, we can specify any variable that we want to. In our case, we want to write the location ID here, so we'll write location ID. If the location ID was 9240, that would appear within the URL itself. Let's do the same thing for the start and end timestamp. Great, we've set up our dynamic endpoint. Let's make this API call. I'll make a new line and I'll write fetch. This is similar to what we did in our fetch locations, where we use fetch with the location endpoint, and then we use a then on the response. We'll do the same thing here. We'll do a fetch on the appointment URL, a new line with a then. We receive a response and we want to convert that to a JSON, so we have to do response.json. When that response is transformed, we're going to receive it in our chained then, and we can do something with this data. Now, what we want to do with this data is find all of the appointments that are active. Back in our API call, we want to find anything that has an active value of greater than 0. We can accomplish that by using the filter function that runs through every single element in the list, and we get to specify what exactly we're looking for. In our case, we want something that has an active field value of greater than 0. So to recap, the response gets transformed into something JSON that we can manipulate. In our second then chained statement, we get that data back that we can use to do something with. And then we use the .filter function, which will return to us every single element in the list, and we'll tell the function whether or not to keep that element in our new list. In our case, we're saying we only want the elements that have an active value greater than 0. We could have a case where some kind of error appears. We can handle that case by using the .catch callback, which gives us an error, and then we can just console log that error. And let's add a console log of the data. Let's import it, fetch open slots. Now, one thing I want to point out is, why did we use a destructured fetch open slots here, and then the fetch locations, we didn't have to specify the opening and closing brackets? That's because inside of fetch locations, we call this export default function. Since we're using an export const in our fetch open slots, we have to specify what exactly we're looking for within the JavaScript file. To be consistent with our new fetch open slots, let's do the same thing with fetch locations. Let's write export const, transform this into a fat arrow function. Back in our background.js, we will add opening and closing brackets. Let's call the fetch open slots in our alarm handler that runs every minute. But there's a problem here. We don't have access to the result object. We don't know what the location ID is or the start and end date. Now, there are a couple of ways to solve this. One is by using chrome.storage.local.get, kind of like what we do in the popup.js at the bottom here when we populate our pop-up window with all of our local saved data. And if you're doing your own tweaks where you want this to run maybe every 30 seconds or every 15 seconds or something, this may be inefficient. What I'm going to do is in our background.js window, whenever we get our new prefs, I'm going to create a local cached version of that within our code. So that'll look like this. At the top here, underneath our const, I'm going to write let cached prefs equal an empty object. What we'll do is whenever we save our prefs here, we're going to also save it to our cached data inside of this code. So inside of here, we'll write cached prefs is equal to prefs. What this means is whenever the user hits handle on start and all the validations have succeeded, we're going to save this locally. And now we can pull this whenever we need to in our onAlarm method. But before we do that, we also need to clear the cache prefs whenever the user hits handle on stop. Right below stop alarm, I'm going to set cache prefs to an empty object. Now we have a result object that we can use here. So let's pass in cached prefs, and this will contain all of the data that we need. Let's do one more thing in fetch open slots before we run this. Within the function, I'm going to do a console log of the result. Now, whenever fetch open slots gets called, we'll see a console log of the result that we're passing in here, along with the data that we've filtered. Back in our Chrome window, I'm going to hit refresh. You'll see the list of locations that were fetched. I'm going to just clear this out to give us some space. Let's open up the Chrome extension window. Let's select Tucson because we've done our research on that. I'll set the start date to be 18th and the end date we can make March 10th. Hit save and start. Now we'll zoom through this until we get our first response back. All right, this is our first response that we've received. Inside of fetch open slots, we see the result object that we passed in that contains end, location, and start date. And it looks like it's found quite a few interview opportunities that are open. The first one looks to be February 28th at 7:30 p.m. And this has 2 appointments available. If you go back to the global entry website and we hit Tucson here, we'll see February 28th is available. Hit choose this location, hit the date, and as suspected, we have a 7:30 p.m. appointment available with 2 time slots. Perfect. So it looks like it's working pretty well, and it seems to be running every minute. We have the open slots API call firing every minute in the background. It's doing our filtering. Now we need to figure out how to show the user a notification that an appointment that meets their criteria is open to be booked. We can accomplish that by using the Chrome.Notifications API. We need the notifications permission in order to use this, and it basically works by using the create function here. If you click into that, we'll have a notification ID. We'll have options here that contain different things that you can specify within the notification itself, and then a callback. We're interested in the notification options, so click on this, and you'll see a list of different things that you can use here. An icon URL may be cool, so we can show our little Chrome extension icon whenever the notification is shown. The message is going to be very crucial. That's going to be exactly what appointment is available. In our case, this will be when the appointment is and what time zone it is in and what date it is. The title will be the global entry drops application name, and the template type will just be basic. We're not looking for anything crazy, just a simple basic notification. Back in our code, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this lib. Inside of lib, I'm going to create a new file called handle notification. Let's create an export const and we'll call this handle notification. It'll take a parameter of appointments. Inside of here, we're going to get the data from the first element within that array, which in our case would be the earliest appointment that meets the user's criteria. And then we'll create a notification from that data. I'm going to rename the parameter to active appointments to make it more descriptive. Let's write if active appointments dot length, which is the size of the array, is greater than 0. This means that there's at least one element in this list. Then we want to run the code block that will create our notification. Let's make a new method, call it create notification, call it active appointment, singular. In here, we'll use the Chrome notifications API, so chrome.notifications.create, and we're going to pass in the notification options. The notification options are different fields you can have in an object. In our case, we care about title, type, message, and icon URL, which are all required for our create notification method. Back in our code, let's specify the title as global entry drops. For our message, we want to say found an open interview at some timestamp here. We don't know what that is exactly. We need to figure out what field we need to show here for the timestamp. Let's jump back to the API call window. Inside of the API call, there's a field called timestamp. Let's use this field to show the user what time and date is available. So we'll write active appointment dot timestamp. The icon URL will just be images/icon-48. And we can find that in here, icon-48, which is under the images folder, is just a slightly larger version of the icon in our Chrome extension window. And finally, we specify the type as basic. Now let's call this within our function up here, and we want to pass in the first of the active appointments by just writing active appointments and using the indexing operator to find the first element in that array. Let's call handle notification back in fetch open slots. At the top here, we're going to use the same import that we used in our background. We used import handle notification from .lib. So that just means we want to move outside of the API folder one level up, and we want to jump into the lib folder, which is specified here, and we want specifically the handle notification.js file. Make sure to add the .js extension at the end here, otherwise it's going to break. Inside of the console log, I'm going to replace this console log with handle notification with the data. Now it's totally possible that the data might be empty, but remember, we're checking that within the handle notification method if there is at least one element in the array. Back in our manifest file, let's create a new line and write notifications. Let's give this a run. Back in my Chrome extension window, I've hit refresh, and we're going to hit save and start here. I'll wait 1 minute and then show you what the resulting notification looks like. And there we go. We have our first notification, found an open interview at 3/1/1730. If you're on a Mac and you don't see the notification and the code is running, you may need to enable notifications for the Google Chrome browser. You can do that by going to Preferences and Notifications and Focus. In here, find each Google Chrome instance. I'm going to click the first one here and confirm that Allow Notifications is enabled and that it shows up in the Notification Center and on the lock screen. Do the same thing for any other instances that you may have where you have to enable notifications. We've done a lot in this video. We figured out how to run API calls in the background every minute. We also figured out how to show a notification. In the next video, we're going to figure out how to make the notifications clickable so that the user is redirected to the Global Entry website whenever they click the notification that a new appointment has opened. We'll also do code cleanup and add additional logic checks for the notification itself. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so I know to keep making more of these. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Jerry.